This episode of Off the Shelf is brought to us by Busy Bee Vegan Skincare. Busy Bee is an all-natural skincare line dedicated to healthy, vegan, plant-based skincare and overall wellness. They offer a selection of handcrafted body scrubs, butters, and washes that not only make your skin glow but smell amazing. Their unique all-natural scents include gingerbread, ruby grapefruit, caramel cake, and morning latte. So why not treat your skin to something fresh and all-natural? Head on over to shopbusybeevegan.com today. And as a special bonus, Busy Bee is offering listeners of this podcast a 15% discount on your first order with the code OrdinaryPodcasts. Thanks for listening and enjoy this week's episode of Off the Shelf. Hello everybody, it's Julia and welcome back to Off the Shelf, the podcast where we take books off of our shelves and into our hearts. And just like that, it's September. This is the first fall in about 6 years that I haven't been jumping back into school, and it's honestly very weird, but it also already feels very normal, in the sense that I personally didn't want to or plan on going back right away. And so to try to fake it and make it work, I just don't think my heart would have been in it. It wasn't the right time for me. I also think there reaches a point in all of our lives where we finally do really accept that even though life keeps moving, whether we're ready for it or not, that doesn't mean we can't help or control where we go within it. Sometimes it brings us work or pleasure or travel or commitment, and maybe someday back to school, but we decide what we do with that. Trying to stay in one place just because we're scared of what comes next inevitably means that we are overtaken with that change. All of this to say, happy September, even if that Hogwarts letter is still adrift, lost in transport somewhere. I hope your summer times were everything you wanted them to be, and as we move closer into the fall, I hope you accept challenges, take chances, and do what feels right and good for your heart and for your mind. Wherever you're at, whatever life throws at you in this coming season and this year, I know you'll be ready for it. To get down to business. If I ever stop talking about life and experience and acting like I'm a lot older and wiser than I actually am. Today, as you all are aware, is the day I'm supposed to announce our September book club read, and so here it is. For September, I've settled on Over the Woodward Wall by A. Deborah Baker. From the Macmillan Publishers website, this is the way the book is described. Writing as A. Deborah Baker, New York Times bestselling and award-winning author Seanan McGuire introduces readers to a world of talking trees and sarcastic owls, of dangerous mermaids and captivating queens in Over the Woodward Wall, an exceptional tale for readers who are young at heart. As you can probably guess, this is a fantasy read, and one quite inspired by and emulative of what I think of as classic fantasy. Stories like Alice in Wonderland, The Wizard of Oz, and other fairy and folk tales. What I didn't realize when I bought this book was that it is actually a companion novel to a book called Middle Game by Seanan McGuire, which I have not read, and at the time of buying this one hadn't even heard of. Don't worry though, I have done my research now, and from what I've seen and read of and about this book, it's not a problem to have not read the initial release before this one. In Middle Game, Over the Woodward Wall is mentioned by name as a book within a book, and it plays an important part to the rest of the story. When Middle Game gained speed, someone suggested to Seanan McGuire that she write Over the Woodward Wall, kind of like how J.K. Rowling wrote The Tales of Beedle the Bard or any of the other Hogwarts textbooks that have since been released. And the rest, as they say, is history. The book is described as having a wide-ranging audience, incorporating the life lessons and morals of your classic fairy tales without ever being overbearing or condescending. It's a short book, but it packs a powerful punch, and I'm really excited to dig into it with you all. In hopes of hooking you, here is the book's summary from the dust jacket. Quote, Avery is an exceptional child. Everything he does is precise, from the way he washes his face in the morning to the way he completes his homework, without complaint, without fuss, without prompt. Zib is also an exceptional child, because all children are in their own way. But where everything Avery does and is can be measured, nothing Zib does can possibly be predicted, except for the fact that she can always be relied upon to be unpredictable. They live on the same street, they live in different worlds. On an unplanned detour from home to school one morning, Avery and Zib find themselves climbing over a stone wall into the up and under, an impossible land filled with mystery, adventure, and the strangest creatures. And they must find themselves and each other if they are also to find their way out and back to their own lives." Unquote. From the outset, I am preparing for a narrative filled with whimsy and dreams and unbelievable impossible things, and probably a whole lot of symbolism if we want to dig in enough. That, I know, sometimes on the surface doesn't sound nearly as fun or engaging or worthwhile as it ends up being, but take it from me, give it a shot. I don't think we're going to be disappointed by this one. Maybe a little bit confused, and maybe a little bit lost at times, but never put out or regretful of the efforts we put into making our way through. I might be biased, and I might be a little bit driven by ulterior motives, because I love a good fantasy read, but I hope this one might mark the start of a new appreciation for you too. To leave that for now and let it all sink in though, let's take our start of the month, much needed and well-deserved break from book dissection, and focus on something maybe a little lighter. Today, as I talked about to start us off, feels like the start of a brand new fall, even though summer doesn't actually end until the autumn equinox. Because for me, September has always marked the start of a new school year, the fall term. I'm not sure I'll ever be fully out of that school brain. It feels so official, September 1st. Back to school. Time to panic buy all the school supplies you forgot you needed because there was still 3 weeks of August left until suddenly there were 3 days, and it's time to load up on color-specific duotangs and lined paper and exactly 3 red pens, and of course scented markers and the 96 pack of crayons, because the 24 just isn't enough, and the 96 is truly the claim to fame that at 8 years old everyone lives for. I don't know if you could tell or if anyone else can relate, but my favorite part of back to school was always school supply shopping. And it got a lot less fun in university when I had to buy everything myself, but that still didn't fully take away from the nerdy joy in pencils that all have their little erasers and fresh notebooks that we never end up finishing out all the paper in, and Sharpies with ends still chiseled enough to cut a man. Anyway, because God, please someone stop me. Otherwise I will go back to the store and buy more school supplies that I do not need. Fall. Coming up on the end of the season and the start of a new got me thinking about the way that book lists and releases are often scheduled and organized by season. Like when you see recommendations lists titled things like 10 spooky reads for October or 31 perfect beach reads to get you ready for the summer. Most of the time, to be honest, the time I spend looking at these lists outweighs the time I actually spend finding and reading their recommendations. What usually happens is that I get to the end of a busy holiday season or whatever occasion and realize that actually that Christmas-themed romance novel that I've been putting off reading because, oh, it's a Christmas book, is still on my shelf, still unread, and wholly less appealing, once again, now that the Christmas lights are starting to come down and the trees are out to be picked up for chipping. And on my shelf it will stay for another year until the next holiday season. Some years, especially when I was in school, I actively avoided reading them because Christmas, for example, was supposed to be my break from basing my reading by what felt like more of an obligation than pleasure. And besides, I have shelves of unread books because I do truly love taking recommendations from other bookies. But my most reliable recommendations haven't usually come from online lists, but from my friends or people who I know have similar tastes in books to my own. Sometimes I even go into chapters and realize that every book I've picked up has the same name on their staff picks sticker. I consider that person I've never met to be a good source. However, for someone who doesn't really take a lot of recommendations from lists or people I don't know, I sure spend enough time looking at those lists, if maybe only to judge them and to see how many of the books I've already read, or see if there are any I disagree with having on the list. Maybe I think too highly of my own reading taste. Maybe it's a overconfidence thing, an ego. Maybe I need to reconsider my life choices. Anyway, this type of marketing categorization, I think, has a lot to do with the way that booksellers decide what they'll buy and when they buy it, because like producing a show or writing a book, everything happens in advance. At my work, for example, we've already started looking ahead and accumulating some of our stock for Halloween and Christmas time. We even started that in June and July. The way that advertising works these days in general is mostly through hype. As soon as one holiday is over, stores start preparing for the next, putting out decor and themed jelly beans and all of their seasonal tea towels out front. And for anticipated book releases, it isn't that much different. There's also something psychological about hype that works for us, clearly. TikTok, or more specifically Book Talk, is kind of a hub right now for promoting and publicizing what's hottest in the book world. Sometimes even being the origin of that hype, but not always for the best of reasons or rationale. It almost seems like these highly anticipated and highly hyped books themselves have become a source of fear of missing out. Like, if we miss out on jumping on the bandwagon, or we just miss it entirely especially, then we also miss out on this huge part of our culture, of the world, of our lives. But I guess what I'm trying to figure out is this. Is our interest in books, our reading experience, something fully psychological? Or, as these book lists, which promise perfect books for the summer, or for the beach, or for wedding season, or Christmas time, and so on, imply, do our physical environments, which could be based on a lot of different factors like time or place or otherwise, actually change the way we experience and think about any particular story so much? Obviously, our experience in reading might change, even quite drastically based on who we are or where we are mentally. But can those physical factors impact our reading in the same way? The story itself doesn't change, but what do those other variables do for our reading experience in terms of the way those words, the same one day to the next, impact us differently? Maybe this is all very sciencey and heavy for a book podcast, I don't know. But it is interesting to think about, or at least I hope it is. If it helps, we can think of it in less sciencey terms too, because honestly, my science brain also left the building the moment I crossed the stage for my high school graduation ceremony. We can think of it like this. If where and when we read a particular book changes the way we read it, the way we experience it, if it's the truth that a spooky read just won't hit the same in April, and a lovey read outside of February will just make us feel sad and alone, and a beachy read in December just feels wrong, then I think that reading in general must be something much more holistic and immersive than we've sometimes made it out to be in the past. Further from that, I think that might be why it's so important when we read to really take in the words and allow the stories to change the way we live in and see our world. It's actually quite a beautiful thought that there is so much mutuality between our engagement with pieces of our culture and the way we live at any given time or place. It's the idea that, yes, our experiences and our environment make us who we are, and that lends to the way we read. But vice versa, it also means that maybe the things we read can have a real impact on the experiences we have each day, and especially on how we respond to those experiences. They can shape our personalities, because, God knows, at this point, my personality is at least 89% characteristics I've absorbed from fictional characters. But they can also shape our actions, and maybe even our worldview as a whole. Let me give you an example, a story of my own, just so you know I'm not completely off base, that I have done some actual thinking about this whole idea. The idea that pieces of our environment and events and surprises that have little to do with the actual content of a book can impact the way we take in the words. A few months ago, I read Thomas King's Indians on Vacation, which, if you haven't read it, is a great read and I highly recommend it. But anyway, the copy I borrowed from the library was a hardcover, and so the dust jacket was taped down to the book itself, as they usually are. I started reading, and just as I had read past the point where the two main characters arrive at their first destination in Europe, I realized that something was tucked in between the dust jacket and the end papers. A sheet of paper, or actually a few sheets of paper stacked and then folded in half together. I took them out and recognized right away that on them were printed photographs from different locations in Europe, illustrating, as I'd continued to realize as I read, a number of the locations the characters travel through as described in the book. My immediate thought was, how cool that somebody else picked up this book before me, that they read it and took the story to heart, not only because it spoke to them in their current moment, but because it spoke to their own experiences and their own memories, those both past and present. How cool that that was their experience in reading, And how even cooler that they wanted to share how all that made them feel. How cool. My second thought, which I cannot forget to share because it's the most exciting bit of all and maybe even a little bit impossible seeming, but entirely truthful, was this. These look like my grandpa's photographs. My grandpa, I have to add, lives about an hour and a half north of me, and our library region shares material. So if you want a book that's available in another city, they'll send it down to whatever branch you use. My grandpa, I should also add, is a bit of a prolific photographer. He makes these beautiful calendars every year for all of our extended family, and I just love looking at them. It's been his work throughout my life that has inspired me to want to pick up the camera and to see the world in different ways. There's something to the way that the world looks through a viewfinder that is beautiful in a completely different way than you see the world through your eyes. We always talk about the way that you can't capture a sunset in the same way your eyes can capture it through a camera, but I feel like that doesn't eliminate the value in capturing those images, because inevitably when you capture a specific moment in time, there's always going to be something that you captured that you missed on the first viewing that would have been lost if you hadn't ever taken that photo. And I mean, to be honest, cameras actually do a pretty decent job of capturing beauty when you know what you're doing with them. Sometimes they even see more than we do with our eyes the first time we look. For all of those reasons, I thought, these could be my grandpa's photos. And then, after asking my dad, I came to the conclusion, these are his photos. I sent him, my grandpa that is, a quick email just to ask, and our suspicions were correct. He says that it was never his intention to leave the photos in the book after returning it to the library, but the effect that finding them had on me wouldn't go away. By extension of his deeper, more personal, and very timely reading experience, as influenced by his life experience, mine was changed. And if he'd read the book before going on the trip during which he'd taken those photos, it would have changed not only his reading experience, but mine too. If I'd borrowed the book from the library before he did, or someone else had borrowed it in between us and removed the photos, or if I'd bought the book instead of finding it at the library, then everything might have shifted. Not fully, but just enough to make a difference. Maybe I'm overthinking it, but I think it's so, I'm sorry to use the word again, but so cool that our lives can be so full of possibilities and potentials and improbabilities and choices and alternatives that things that seem so small can make such a big difference, even when they look similarly small on their faces. Would my life have been altered drastically by just reading the book and enjoying it and maybe thinking about it and then returning it to the library instead? Maybe not, but our lives aren't always big drama all the time. There's sometimes a lot of wonder and joy to be found in small packages. Sometimes ones as small as a gently used 9x6 hardcover. So, all of this to say, I do think that the times and places we read certain books at or in impact the way we take in their stories. It might mean that the age we are and our experience up to that point shape our reading experience differently than they would have had we read the book 3 years earlier, 3 years later, or in a different place or a different season. It might mean that different parts of the book instead will stand out to us based on what time of year it is, or where we're living at that time, or who else we're around at that time. Those physical factors can and do change not only how much we enjoy or understand the story, but the details of it that are highlighted for us, and the parts that pull our hearts in 100 different ways, and parts that refuse to let go, and then the parts that do let go, but do so in a way that still hang in your memory and leave their threads trailing across your skin, raising chills. Books are an actively immersive experience. They give us everything they have, and they ask nothing in return really, but if we want to really feel the impacts of what they give, then we kind of have to give some of ourselves back, and out too, and the mutuality of that exchange and the way that it can spiderweb out to those around us is something else. Something kind of lovely. for today, that's all I've got for you. I hope it's something to think on, because I've been glad for the time I've taken to think on it too. I hope that the start of this month is everything you need it to be, wherever you're at. And I hope that as soon as you want or can, you decide to take a chance on a Deborah Baker's Over the Woodward Wall along with me. Thank you so much for listening today, and take care until next time. And of course, happy reading. The Off the Shelf podcast is a proud member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. To learn more about this podcast or the network, please visit ordinarypodcast.com. Finally, thank you for listening, and if you haven't already, please subscribe or leave us a comment. Thank you so much, and take care.